Thank you so much for attending this session today. It's on the energy saving scheme and the Neighbours baseline method. So, oh, my screen's not working. Here we go. I'm going to start with an acknowledgement of country. So we'd like to acknowledge that we meet today on many Aboriginal lands across the state and maybe across Australia. I'm currently in northern Sydney on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, which is a very beautiful part of the world in my opinion. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands, and we show our respect for elders past, present and emerging. So to start off this webinar today, I wanted to go through a couple of housekeeping rules. If you could please mute yourself when you're not speaking, that would be great. Magali is going to be going around and muting anyone who has forgotten. Second one is please feel free to use the chat box throughout the session to ask any questions that you think of while we're speaking. We're going to have dedicated Q&A sessions, one at the very end and one after the ESS part of the speak today. So we can go through questions then, but if you could use the chat box just to, if you have any comments or questions. The session is going to be recorded today and the video and slides will be made available online. So jumping into the agenda, actually before jumping into that, I wanted to quickly go through why we're conducting this webinar today. I think that's probably quite important to go through. So at Neighbours, one of the things we've been working on is trying to improve support and access to incentives. And I guess one of the aims of this is to help accelerate energy efficiency, as well as obviously help our customers and assessors better access Neighbours ratings. And one of the major financial incentives available for Neighbours buildings is the energy saving scheme. So we've spent a bit of time this financial year researching the Neighbours baseline method, and we know that there are many buildings that were eligible to generate ESCs, but they didn't generate ESCs. We've also spoken to quite a few stakeholders, and there is a big knowledge gap on what the Neighbours baseline method is. So this webinar today is really an awareness raising session to explain what the energy saving scheme is, what the Neighbours baseline method is, and how assessors and customers can use a Neighbours rating to make potential financial savings. So the agenda for today, we're going to firstly go through what the New South Wales Energy Saving Scheme is, and we have Alona who will be taking us through that section. So Alona is a Senior Project Officer in the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment, and she works in the ESS team on updating the rules. So she's going to take you through a high-level overview of the ESS and a summary of the different ESS methods that apply for commercial buildings. I'm going to then take you through the Neighbours baseline method. So my name's Jess Edmeads. I'm a technical officer with Neighbours. I'm going to be going through the recent updates to the rules, as well as how you can generate ESCs using your Neighbours rating. And then at the very end, we're going to have a Q&A session, and that is going to be with Alona from the ESS team, myself and Magali Wardle, who is on the call somewhere. She is the Policy and Partnerships Manager with Neighbours. So we're from the Neighbours team, and we also have some Neighbours accredited ACPs who are also going to be here to help answer your questions. So I'm going to pass it over to Alona, who is now going to talk to you about the New South Wales Energy Saving Scheme. Thanks, Alona.
Thank you, Jess. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Awesome. So as Jess has just introduced me, I work with the Energy Saving Scheme, and I'm here to quickly give you an overview of what ESS is, although I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with it. Energy Saving Scheme is the largest energy efficiency program in New South Wales. You can see the numbers on the screen here. ESS is a certificate trading scheme, or to put it more simply, it's a scheme that incentivizes energy efficiency. Next slide, please, Jess. To give you a little bit of background, I'll speak about the energy security safeguards. So the New South Wales Electricity Strategy, announced in 2019, has announced that the ESS will be expanded to run to 2050, potentially expanding in terms of the activities within the scheme, potentially including new fuels, and also expanding its targets from 8.5% currently to 13% in the future. So we ran a public consultation earlier this year in around July, August, I believe, and the New South Wales government is currently putting together a position paper which will provide more details on these changes sometime very soon. The electricity strategy also announced the introduction of the peak demand reduction scheme, and the safeguard consultation also consulted on the details of it. Next slide, please, Jess. And here is a really high-level overview of the methods we have in the ESS to calculate energy savings. As you can see, I have two axes there showing the complexity of the methods and the average energy savings you could get from a method. So the easiest and the one that has been most widely used is the stream called the deemed energy savings methods. These methods are super easy to use. We provide energy savings factors in the ESS rule. So all you need to do is collect evidence, use those deemed saving factors, and create ESCs. One of the methods under this stream has been most broadly used, as you may know, the commercial lighting method, which contributed to approximately 70%, I think, of all the ESCs in the ESS so far. On the top left corner, let me talk about the ones on the right. So the measured and verified methods, one of the most widely used, the one that is most widely used is our project impact measurement with verification method. It's a method that provides you with many more ESCs. It also provides those ESCs pretty much upfront, but it's a much more complex method because it involves the measurement of energy before the upgrade and after the upgrade. And so with all the complexity involved, it has been primarily used by really large projects that are worthwhile taking all of those steps. Now, the metered baseline methods that you can see on the top left there are the ones that we'll be talking about today. Neighbours method falls under those methods. It's a stream of methods where you measure your energy consumption year by year and create energy savings on a yearly basis. So overall, they provide the greatest amount of ESCs because they know, but less discounting involved of the energy savings. The Neighbours methods that we'll be talking about today not only provides you with the possibility to create ESCs year by year, but as Jess will let you know in a moment, it also now allows you to forward create ESCs for up to 3 years. So I think that's what's making the method really attractive now. This is a really quick introduction. I don't think I have any more slides left. Jess, are we answering questions now or are we waiting for the end of the presentation?
Yeah, if anyone does have any questions on the energy saving scheme part, feel free to shout out now, or Magali, if there are any questions in the box so far, if you wouldn't mind reading them out because I cannot see them at the moment. If not, I'll move on.
Nothing there as yet. We'll just wait a little bit in case something comes up.
If there are no questions about the energy saving scheme, we can come back to them, and if you think of any during the next section, just type them in or remember them for later and we can come back to it. But
there is a quick question from Rod Kington asking, can you explain the 3 years forward? So I think you're going to get to that anyway, Jess. So yeah, we'll cover that in the next section, Rod. Thanks for the question.
Yeah. Perfect. I'll move on to the Neighbours baseline method now, but if you do have any questions, just type them in the chat box or hold them till the very end and we will open up to a Q&A session then. Cool. So as Alona mentioned, the Neighbours baseline method is one of the many approved methods that participants can use to generate ESCs under the New South Wales Energy Saving Scheme. The Neighbours method uses a Neighbours energy rating to calculate savings, which means you can generate ESCs in any building sector where a Neighbours energy rating exists. So that includes apartment buildings, data centres, hospitals, hotels, offices, and shopping centres. And then coming in 2020, 2021, sorry, will have residential aged care and retirement living. Before I move on, I just want to make it really clear that throughout the rest of this presentation, when I refer to a NABERS rating, I'm referring to a NABERS energy rating, because the energy saving scheme is only concerned with energy savings. So don't think about a water or a waste rating as an example, only NABERS energy rating. So in March this year, improvements were made to the NABERS baseline method to make it easier for building owners and asset managers to create ESCs. But before we go into what those changes were, I thought we would take you guys through what the old method is, especially because it's still being grandfathered across. So there are still a few buildings that will be using this. So the NABERS baseline method has two methods to determine if you are eligible or not eligible to generate ESCs. Method 1 is called the Benchmark NABERS Rating Index, and method 2 is the Historical Baseline NABERS Rating. So method 1 is based on a building's performance against the market average star rating for the same building type. So that means a building has to perform better than the average building in that sector. The average energy ratings are found in the ESS rules under table A20, but I've attached a copy of that table in this box here. So these are taken from the predated rules from prior to March 2020. So if you are looking for the updated rules, please do not use this table. There is the updated one in the ESS rules. But under method 1 of the old rules, any building would be eligible to create ESCs if they had a star rating that was at least half a star higher than the benchmark in this table. Method 2 is based on a building's performance against its previous rating, and that rating can be taken from up to 7 years ago. Under the old rules, a building would have to have a star rating that was at least 1 star higher than the historical baseline NABERS rating. And as I mentioned, that rating could be taken from up to 7 years ago, but no more than 7 years. And it has to be based on a similar building configuration to the historical rating. So if you make major updates to a building, like structural changes, for example, you could not use a rating that happened prior to those and compare it to the new rating, as an example. So, as I mentioned, in March this year, the NABERS method was updated to make it easier for buildings to generate ESCs. And these changes were made to to encourage building owners to move away from method 1, which encourages which compares your current NABERS rating to a benchmark rating, and it encourages buildings to move towards method 2, which is making improvements on your energy performance in comparison to a previous performance. So, under method 1, the main changes that have occurred are to be eligible, it must be the building's first NABERS energy rating. And if the rating was received to meet a legal requirement such as CBD, the building is not eligible to participate. I've also attached table A20 from the ESS rules down here. So this table is the updated version of the NABERS average benchmarks. So please use this updated table if you're using the new method. Changes to method 2. So a building no longer has to improve its star rating by a whole star to generate ESCs. It only needs to improve by half a star in comparison to its previous rating. So that makes it easier for buildings to actually generate ESCs. And under method 2, we also have forward creation that was introduced. And I'm going to go into that a bit further on in the slides. So I'll just leave it there for now. Okay. On this slide, we're going to go through the eligibility requirements and we're going to go through a few scenarios. So on the left-hand side, you've got the eligibility for method 1. In the middle, you've got the eligibility requirements for method 2. And then I'm going to run through those 3 scenarios on the right-hand side. So the first scenario I'll take you through is an office building. It's located in Orange, New South Wales. It has an NLA of 3,000 metres squared. Its previous rating was in 2019 and it had a 3-star rating, and its current rating is so it received it this year, 2020, and it was 3.5 stars. So if we go through method 1 to see if it's eligible under method 1, it must be a New South Wales building to use a Neighbours baseline method. So I'm reading from this box here. So it's located in orange, which means it's eligible. It must be the building's first Neighbours rating. As you can see, it received a rating in 2019 and it has a current rating. So it was not its first rating. So under method 1, it's not eligible. So we're going to move on to method 2 to see if it's eligible underneath the eligibility criteria there. So again, it must be a New South Wales building, which we know it is. It must have a previous Neighbours rating, which it does. And it must have at least a 0.5 star increase from a previous rating. So last year, 2019, it received a 3-star rating, and this year it has a 3.5 star rating. So it has improved by 0.5 star. So under method 2, this office building would be eligible to generate ESCs. Moving on to scenario 2, we have an apartment building located in Sydney, and it was built in 2012, and it has its current rating or first rating is 4.5 stars. So if we look at the eligibility requirements again under method 1, it must be a New South Wales building, which it is, it's located in Sydney. It must be the building's first Neighbours rating, which it is, it received a 4.5 star rating. And it must have a star performance that is at least 0.5 star over the set benchmark rating. And if you read the little text in blue, it says as listed in table A20 of the ESS rules. So that was that table that I showed you before. So in that table, for an apartment building that was built after the 1st of November 2012, sorry, not 2012, 2000 and let me check, 2006, there we go. You have to have, the average apartment building was 4.5 stars. And this building currently has a 4.5 star rating. But to be eligible, it has to be 0.5 star over this set benchmark. So under method 1, this building is not eligible because it is not 0.5 star higher than the benchmark. We also know it wouldn't be eligible under method 2 because it doesn't have a previous Neighbours rating to compare to. So this apartment building would not be eligible to generate ESCs. But if we take the same apartment building and put it, say, into, we'll say it's 2021, and the building improves by 0.5 star, so it gets 5 stars or higher, it would be eligible to generate ESCs in 2021 because you could use the 2020 rating, which was 4.5 stars, as the historical baseline rating, and it has increased by 0.5 star, so it would be eligible under method 2. But this year, the apartment building is not eligible to generate ESCs. The final example I want to go through is a shopping centre located in Gosford, New South Wales. It received its previous rating in 2012 and it was 2 stars, and its current rating is 4.5 stars. So we'll go through the eligibility requirements again. So it must be a New South Wales building, which it is, it's located in Gosford. Must be the building's first Neighbours rating, which it's not, it received a previous Neighbours rating in 2012. So we move over to method 2 to see if it's eligible. So again, it was a New South Wales building, we know that. It must have a previous Neighbours rating, which it does from 2012, it has 2-star rating. And it must be at least a 0.5 star increase from the previous rating, which it does. It has a 4.5 star, which it's actually increased by 2.5 stars since 2012. So a very well-performing building. But if you remember from what I said before, the previous rating can be from 1 to 7 years ago. So the previous rating for this building was taken in 2012 and it's currently 2020. So that was 8 years ago. So the building cannot use the rating from, oh sorry, I'm pointing to the wrong things, 2012 down here. So the building, the previous rating was taken from over 8 years ago, which means that that building cannot use that rating as its historical baseline rating. So under method 1 and method 2, this building isn't eligible to generate ESCs. But similar to the previous example, this building could use its current NABERS rating and use it as its historical baseline rating. And if next year it makes a half-star improvement on its rating, it can then generate ESCs under method 2. So moving on to collecting ESCs under method 2, and this is where I'm going to talk about forward creation and annual creation. So there are 2 ways you can create ESCs under method 2. Forward creation or deeming is when the expected energy savings of a building are collected in advance. So you receive the payment all at once. And you can do this for up to 3 years, as long as your historical baseline rating is from the previous year. Annual creation involves calculating a building's energy savings each year. So it just compares the current NABERS energy rating with the historical baseline rating, and you generate ESCs yearly based on the energy savings. As I mentioned before, the previous NABERS energy rating can be taken from up to 7 years prior to the current rating. However, there is an annual rating adjustment that is included into the calculation. I'm going to take you through this diagram at the bottom. I'm hoping this will make a bit more sense of it. So in the first year, so from 0 to 1, you should be collecting your data and you should get your certified NABERS rating, and this becomes your historical baseline NABERS rating. In the following year, so years 1 to 2, you should work to reduce your energy consumption, because to generate ESCs, your building needs to be performing at least half a star better than the historical rating. So if at the end of year 1, your rating is half a star higher than your historical rating, you are eligible to generate ESCs for the energy savings that you made from the previous years, so year 1 to 2. And this is where forward creation comes in. So forward creation assumes you are going to maintain that same star energy rating. So you're able to collect the ESCs for years 2 and 3 at the same time you are collecting them for year 1. If over that time, so years 2 and 3, your energy rating increases again, so as an example, you might go up by another half star, you're also eligible to top up and collect those additional ESCs that you didn't receive. At the end of year 3, start of year 4, you then go back to annual creation, which just generates your ESCs on a year-by-year basis in comparison to your historical baseline rating. Alternatively, you don't have to use forward creation at all. You can just use annual creation, which, as I said before, it's where you collect ESCs year by year in comparison to the historical baseline rating. A final big thing that I really want to mention on this slide is this point down here. An ACP must be nominated before the end of the current rating period. And I really want to emphasize this. If you received a star rating last year and you think that you're on track to improve by at least half a star, you must nominate an ACP before the end of the current rating period. Otherwise, you are not eligible to generate ESCs. I'm going to come back to this point and explain a bit more about what an ACP is and what this involves, but that's a really important note that I want you to remember. Okay, moving on to the potential savings. So the NABERS team did some modelling to understand what the potential ESCI earnings would be if a building was to improve from a 3-star to a 3.5-star building. And these figures here are based on using method 2 and generating ESCIs using forward creation over 3 years. So the ESCI price is also based here on the average ESCI price, which is about $20. So as you can see, for offices, it's 18 to 35K. For shopping centres, 45 to 90, hotels 32 to 64, and apartment buildings 7 to 14K. So these figures aren't definite. It's not a confirmation that you'll receive that amount of money, but they give you a rough understanding of how much money different buildings could make if they forward created ESCIs and sold the ESCIs for roughly $20 per ESCI. I'm going to leave it there and move on to the final slide before our Q&A session. And I'm going to mention the ACP thing again. So I want to actually explain what an ACP is. So an ACP is an accredited certificate provider for anyone who doesn't know what that is. They create, register and sell ESCs for their own company or on behalf of a client. So if you improve your Neighbours rating by 1/2 star and you're eligible to generate ESCs, you would go to an ACP and they would create them for you and they would help you sell them. So for buildings that are looking to use method 2, so comparing your current rating to a historical rating for the same building, if you haven't already gathered a baseline rating, gather that data and get a certified Neighbours rating so you have something to compare to. Then move on to step 2, which is make a plan to reduce your energy consumption. Just remember, you aren't eligible to generate ESCs unless you have improved your energy performance by at least 1/2 star. Then, and this is the really important part, contact an ACP. As I mentioned before, an ACP must be nominated before the end of the current rating period. So engage with them early so you don't miss out on generating ESCs. Talk to an ACP to understand if you're eligible as well, and if it's actually worthwhile you generating ESCs. From there, you can work with your ACP and your assessor to reduce your building's energy consumption, and then hopefully you'll be able to generate ESCs and additional savings. We would love that. If you're a new building that has never had a rating and you want to go through the method 1 route, I would suggest skipping steps 1 and 2, and I would go straight to step 3, contact an ACP. Again, talk to them early, see if you are eligible, and if not, you can work with them and an assessor to make a plan to go through method 2. So that brings me to the end of the Neighbours baseline method. We're about to go into the Q&A session, and for the Q&A session, we have myself and Magali from the Neighbours team who will be helping answer questions, as well as Alona from the ESS team. And then we also have 3 Neighbours accredited ACPs. So we have Vincent from Demand Manager, Jens and Abdullah from Energy Conservation, and Shulk from Sigma Global. I'm going to get them each to give a brief explanation of who they are, what their company is, before we get into the Q&A. So I might hand over to Vincent. Vincent, if you'd like to quickly introduce yourself for a minute or so and explain a bit about your company.
Sure, thank you. My name is Vincent. I work for a company called Demand Manager. We've been around for quite a while, established in 2006. We've been involved in ESS since its commencement in 2009. Basically a consultancy company helping facilitate access to government funding programs aimed at energy and energy efficiency and renewable energy savings. We operate around Australia, South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales. We've got a couple of accreditations under the ESS, including for Neighbours ratings. And we've been fairly active over the years. We've created more than 3.5 million certificates. And I'll leave it at that.
Cool, thanks so much, Vincent. I'm going to pass over to Jens and Abdullah if you're both there.
Yes, can you hear us?
Yep, loud and clear.
Great. Thanks for that. And good to see you all here, including some of our colleagues there. So we're working here at Energy Conservation. We're in our office in Fairmont at the moment. So we're a service provider for energy and waste management services, headquartered in Fairmont, where we've got an office in Melbourne. So mostly active in New South Wales and Victoria. We've been involved in the energy savings scheme since 2013. A couple of years later, actually, in the scheme in Victoria. Mostly active in the commercial lighting activities and then also M&V activities, or that measurement and verification method that we looked at. But we have been accredited under the Neighbours baseline method. We've been working with the department as well on trying to make that method more attractive over the years. I don't think I need to add a lot more. I think I've seen already some good questions coming past there. So yeah, we look forward to answering some of those if we can. Thank you.
Thanks, Jens. I'm going to pass over to Shulk if you're there as well, Shulk.
Hi, everyone. Quick introduction. We are experts in environmental markets. We work in carbon, renewables, and energy efficiency. We've been active on the S for a while. The Neighbours accreditation we've held since 2012. Perhaps on other notes, since there's a lot of Neighbours assessors here, we also use Neighbours ratings to make buildings carbon neutral. And as a proportion of type of work that we are doing at the moment, I think carbon neutral seems to be the most type of work, but Neighbours work just ticks over regularly every year. Thanks.
Thanks all. So those are the 3 Neighbours accredited ACPs. I'm going to open up to questions now. Would
Yes,
anybody?
there's quite a few in the chat, so maybe I might go through those first if that's
Perfect.
okay with you. So I'll just take it from the top. Firstly, Rod, you had a question initially about the forward creation. I think we've covered that off unless there's any more questions on forward creation. Nope. Okay. So I'll move on to your next question, which is, are SGs generated on the basis of stars or on the basis of carbon reductions? Submetering and can dramatically improve a building star rating, but does not reduce carbon emissions. Who would like to answer that one? Any takers?
If I may, because I thought that was a good question actually. So yeah, if you don't mind, if I take that question, I just got the method guide quickly out because I looked that particular question up as well, and basically in the rules or the method it describes that the baseline so your baseline rating or the building as it was during that baseline rating needs to have a similar configuration. Which means that the difference in the rating inputs needs to be 5% or less, but it also stipulates that the submetering arrangements are the same. And then it goes into a little bit more detail as to what it means, but it basically says that that the submetering arrangements need to be the same. And so if you were to add submetering to be able to make exclusions or inclusions to improve that Neighbours rating, then it would no longer be an eligible thing. And so what you would have to do then is create a baseline rating that has already been equipped with that submetering equipment, then improve the rating and create those certificates. I hope I'm making sense there, but basically, yeah, you can't do it through submetering. It has to be a net carbon saving.
I think to add on to that as well, so to generate ESCIs using the Neighbours baseline method, to be eligible, you have to improve by 1/2 a star. So from that sense, it is based on star rating improvement. But once you've actually reached those eligibility requirements, it's then based on the actual energy savings that you have saved. I hope that kind of clarifies a bit of that.
Thanks, Jess. That's awesome. Thanks for that great question. So the next question comes from Alan Ashby. What if the last 7 years of Neighbours energy ratings are varied? Do you elect to take the lowest star rating or the average or the highest from that period? Good question, Alan. Who would like to answer that? I have a feeling this could be an Alona question.
Yes, I can try to give a go. Now, the later the rating, the less energy savings you get because of the annual rating adjustment over years. So we haven't touched on every little detail of the method, but that's one thing to consider. Another thing to consider in the equation is that over years, you'll need to deduct any increases in energy consumption to arrive at your final number of ESCIs that you can claim. So you really need to look which configuration would make most sense. But I think if you deducted the annual rating adjustment, and if you took into account any energy savings you need to deduct because of decrease in energy efficiency over years, it would make most sense to take the latest rating you have, as long as it's half a star lower than your current rating.
Thanks, Ilona. And there's another one here that's probably going to fall in your camp from Jake Sherry, saying many buildings have seen artificial boosts to their ratings in 2020 due to COVID-19 restrictions. Is this taken into account when calculating ESCs?
It sounds more like a scheme administrator question, but
Right.
again, going back to what Jens mentioned earlier, they're the requirements of similar configuration, with every rated parameter needing to be within 5% of what it was in a baseline rating. So again, it will go back, I believe, to the similar configuration requirement.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question from Caroline Bennett. What happens if one or some of the activities done to reduce energy are claimed under a different method, such as commercial lighting? How is that accounted for? I think that would be great if one of our ACPs would do that.
I can take that
Yeah.
one. I can take that one.
Great, thank you.
We've had a similar scenario a couple of years ago. There was an office building in a city that was, a previous claim was made through the then PIAM method for an air conditioning upgrade. And we came back a couple of years later and we wanted to make a claim for Neighbours. So we worked with the scheme administrator to find a way to make that happen. And basically, the air conditioning upgrade was claimed for 5 years up front. We worked out what the annual savings were. We managed to get in touch with the party who made the claim at the time. And basically, we deducted the annual savings from the Neighbours claim, and on the difference, we were able to claim those certificates. So there was no double dipping, and it would just be isolated to the particular activity, and we could make it work from there on.
Great, that's a great answer. Thanks, Vincent. Okay, we have a question from Rod to everyone. With the Neighbours method, do you still have to demonstrate the reason for the energy improvement? Shulk, would you like to take that one?
I'm happy to give it a go. I'm not entirely sure what the reason, what the question means, in the sense of what is the reason for the energy improvement.
Rod, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, so currently if you generate ESCs, you have to, my understanding is that you actually have to say what the savings were achieved by, especially even if it's a baseline method, which was the older method a lot of buildings have. Every year they come along, they reassess the energy consumption this year, and if there's been savings, the ACP has to identify why the savings have been achieved. What I wanted to know is, under the Neighbours scheme, is that requirement still in place? So you have to say, I've done this, 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 and this year. That's the reason why I got my half-star improvement. Or is it good enough just to say I got a half-star improvement?
So to answer your questions, I suppose I answered it twofold. So on the one hand, you need to have some form of justification of where the savings come from. On the other hand, the Neighbours method is designed to also capture a large amount of little upgrades. So you need to provide some justification of why you've achieved the savings, but it's not as detailed as is done, for example, in the commercial lighting method or in the PIMV method. So you have a bit more flexibility there. On the flip side, and I think this is related to the question that you asked later, and this is also related to justification on, when your building is half occupied, and I'll tie the two things together. So you need to justify where your savings come from, and then to also tie it back to Jens's earlier comment of a similar configuration. Well, I think the similar configuration elements will be determined by IPART. We've been hit a few times and it was nothing to do with the building, but it had to do with the legislation change. Their interpretation then was no longer similar configuration for various reasons, and therefore the building becomes ineligible. So in My expectation for your statement, while I don't make these decisions, I think there's a fair chance that IPART will reject his claim.
So there's a risk though for owners. So if you invest into these paths and invest into the method, if your building changes operation, you lose your original baseline. So if your fill, even if your occupancy rate of the building changes over time, which all buildings do, all commercial buildings, let's stick with commercial, it's less so for shopping centres and some of the other aspects. But certainly for commercial, they can change in occupancy over time. So whilst you thought you were going to do all this work to generate ESCs, you might suddenly get IPART making a decision that it's changed significantly. We're also disincentivizing submetering and things like that, which improve people's neighbours ratings as well. And also people will be going, oh no, I'm now going to make changes which loses my generation. Now, I can't remember hearing all of these so much in the baseline method, which a lot of the buildings I deal with have already quite long time ago benchmarks set in place. But we get occupancy rates varying quite regularly. So
yeah, I think there's a few things. So let's ignore COVID for a moment, because this is an extreme scenario. Typically what happens, and I think in a practical matter, is you got to look at your neighbor's rating certificate and your neighbor's energy report. The parameters that are listed on your energy report are typically used to determine the 5% factor. So if your square meterage changes a lot, and that's what Jens was saying before with the submetering, then there's a chance that IPART will say not accepted.
5% is not much, not an NLA of a building.
And you know, just for some background, I've had these conversations with Ilona in rule changes over time. We have a decent chunk of buildings, office buildings, residential apartment buildings, shopping centers, etc. We've lost a lot of them that were generating nicely along the way because the rules were changed. So I strongly suggest to note these comments down. These things happen. I have to say though that outside of the rule changes, we've never had buildings getting rejected for the 5% reason. So this is legislation change that caused it, and it was not actual activity on the ground. But I think you got to remember your earlier questions and the earlier answers given. Now going back to Corona, the problem that everyone has is the same problem that you have. Is things have changed considerably. So I know that, for example, in Victoria, the administrator is actively, and the department there is actively engaging with participants to say, what are we going to do about this? Because this doesn't just apply to the neighbours method, but it applies to the PIMV method or the PBA method in Victoria. Everyone is getting hit for that, apart from the deemed methods. And even they're getting hit because they can't actually get on site. So the discussions at the moment, they exist. I don't think any of the government departments have answers yet. What I suspect may happen if there isn't an answer, that there may be a scenario where you skip a rating. So you set your baseline, let's make it 2019. You don't get to use your 2020 rating, and you're going back in 2021. And that's the disadvantage of the neighbours method. You got to wait a long time before you get the claim.
Sorry, can I just pick you up on that? Because I just need to be mindful that we're not conflating two things here. The one is, so the initial question was whether you have to demonstrate the reason for the energy improvement. And I think the answer to that really is no, you don't. It's as long as you have a neighbours rating, the neighbours rating is the evidence that your energy consumption has gone down, and it's just not, it does not discriminate between different upgrades. But what is true is that from there you might run into the problem of the building having changed configuration, and so that is where the problem lies. I think one of the strengths of the neighbours baseline method is precisely that it doesn't discriminate between the nature of the upgrade. It's really just about the rating. So as long as you have a certified rating and then another certified rating, then on that basis you could create these energy saving certificates, provided that the building didn't change configuration or that it changed configuration within those margins, right? I just wanted to make sure that we're not conflating one issue with the other.
Thanks, Jens and Shulk. I think we'll just move on to the next question. I think what I'm taking away from this is it's obviously really important to start talking to an ACP early on in the piece if you're thinking about generating ESCs and how that can work for you and whether it's the right approach for your building. So we've got a question here from Ethan Burns asking whether carbon neutral will be offered for apartment buildings in the future. I think, Ethan, we'll just take that one offline because it's a good question, but not really so closely linked to ESCs. Jake Sherry has a question. Should we interpret that as the rated NLA cannot vary by more than 5%? I think we've answered that one. Yep. So I'm moving on to a question from Brent Clark saying, is there going to be an online calculator which allows you to work out dollar savings by star improvements to allow the assessor to provide indicative New South Wales ESS savings at time of quoting to the customer? Jess, would you like to answer that one, or would you like me to take that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that one. So it's definitely something that we're looking into doing. It's a bit of work though, so don't expect anything too soon, I would say. It's also a bit difficult to calculate, so we can tell you how many ESCs that you're able to generate using the reverse calculators, but it's actually quite hard to give you an exact dollar figure because the cost of ESCs can vary dependent on who you sell them to. So I would say, yes, we can tell you how many ESCs you can generate from your changes in your building. We probably cannot give you an exact figure on how, what the actual financial income or saving, the financial amount that would be, because it depends how much you sell your ESCs for. But a calculator is something that we're looking into.
Thank you, Jess. So that comes to the end of the questions in the chat. Does anyone else have any other questions they'd like to ask while we've got all the experts in the room?
You're on mute, yeah.
I think that's it.
I'm happy to have a question. I've always got questions, don't worry. I'm just interested, funnily enough, the Neighbours team have enough data and enough information, especially now we're adding in the year of build of buildings into Neighbours ratings, that actually you could almost generate the certs. You have all the data to make all the decision trees, and you haven't explained the whole decision tree because I've noticed that going through some of this today, but you actually have all the data to turn around and send someone, hey, would you like to generate certs for this site? And this is how much you get based upon this price. You actually have the full information. You know, you've got all the data to show the 5% shifts. You've got everything. You could actually, if you took on the administration, or you could actually do the whole thing. You could actually say, you rated this building this year, based upon the history of ratings you've got, you can generate certs today, 3 years forward, and you'll get approximately this many certs worth approximately this much money, because you have a lot of info.
We do. That's that would be a really nice solution, wouldn't it? And you're right that we do collect a lot of the relevant information already as part of the Neighbours rating. There are a few gaps of information in terms of what we collect, and there's also some reasonable regulatory hurdles to make that change. So it's a great suggestion and something that we'd definitely like to think about a bit more. But I think it's also not something we could just sort of turn over quickly, if you understand.
Oh no, yeah, sorry, the Neighbours team doesn't do things that quick.
Well, also it's not just the Neighbours team, like because obviously there's the regulator, that's the I part that would need to get involved as well. But yeah, it's a very interesting idea and suggestion.
Because you could issue it with the Neighbours cert, literally, and say you can generate. Click here, fill in this form, and I'll give you 30 grand. It won't be that much. Depends on the size of the building. I loved your numbers.
That would be great, wouldn't it?
That was a bit like average size of building in Australia numbers. I was like,
it's the same average buildings that we have in our fact sheets. We just kept consistent. But yeah, it's a great suggestion. Any more? Otherwise, we're getting close to the end of our hour session anyway.
I just wanted to make one final comment on Brent Clark's question. If you got real projects and you have an anticipation on how you are going to improve, we're happy to give you feedback on what we anticipate the savings to be and how they convert into ESCs. With the caveat that please don't bombard, I suppose, the three of us with not real projects, because I suspect everyone is busy enough.
Great, that's really helpful. And there's one last question from Ian asking, what are typical ASP fee structures? Are they percentage based or fixed? Anyone?
I can take that question.
Vincent.
Yeah, sorry.
I know that all ASPs operate slightly differently, but yeah, we base it on a percentage base. So we come to an agreement up front. Other ASPs might have like a fixed dollar rate. So yeah, it's something just to negotiate. The other thing I wanted to notify everyone about is that there are also options. Like if you're fairly confident that you're going to create a certain number of certificates, especially considering the forward creation, there are also ways to lock in contracts on the market, call it forward contracts. So you're basically guaranteed to have a fixed ESCI rate. So in particular for larger chunks of certificates, that's something to consider. And obviously the advantage of dealing with ACPs is that they're working on a lot of different projects at the same time, so they might be able to bundle smaller parcels into a bigger one and then lock in a contract to have some certainty about the certificate price. Just wanted to throw that out there.
Yep, that's great. Thank you very much for that. So I think we might close out the Q&A. Thanks for all those great questions, everyone. And of course, we're going to put our contact details at the end, and you've got the contact details for all the 3 ACPs that have come along today as well. So feel free to reach out, and if you have any further questions, I'll hand it back to Jess.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for everyone for contributing in that Q&A session. I think it went really well. Yeah, so this brings us to, I guess, the last slide. Just quickly, before I get into this last slide, Magali is going to post a survey into the chat box, and we would really, really appreciate it if you could take 2 minutes to answer the questions we have there. We are going to use this data. It really helps us, I guess, to tailor what future work we can do and how we can help you all with the Neighbours baseline method and what would be better. So please, if you have a spare few minutes, if you could answer it, that would be great. So yes, next steps from here. To find out more about the Neighbours baseline method, the Neighbours team have created a few good resources on our website. So we have a fact sheet that goes over the Neighbours baseline method. And we also conducted a case study with Dexis where they talk about their experiences generating ESCIs and that kind of process. So please go check out those. This webinar today is being recorded and will be made available online with the slide deck as well. So you can go check that out. And I'm going to send out those resources in an email to all registered participants after this session has finished. If you're interested in generating ESCIs, get in contact with an ACP. Obviously, as Shulk said, make sure it's you actually are eligible. So go through our fact sheet, check that you actually are eligible and you think that you might be able to generate quite a few ESCIs. So yeah, we had the contact emails for Demand Manager, Energy Conservation, and Sigma Global on the previous slide. Another suggestion is you could consider actually becoming an ACP. So for example, there are a couple of large property companies who are NABERS accredited ACPs, and they generate ESCs for their own building portfolios. So that is another avenue that you could consider. Finally, if you have any questions or are after any more information, please feel free to get in contact with myself or the NABERS team. So we've got our contact details there, so you can either send us an email or give us a call. I'm going to quickly pass over to Magali, who is going to talk about the BCI, the New South Wales offer that's going on, and then we'll finish up.
Yeah, while I have this captive audience, want to remind you all that we currently have an offer out in the market for New South Wales buildings. There's an energy starters stream and a carbon neutral stream. So check out our website. In fact, I'll post the link to the details of the offer, but it's a really good opportunity for buildings that have never had a NABERS rating to get their first ever NABERS rating and understand how their building is performing and potentially get on the journey to generating ESCs. It's also a really good opportunity for building owners that are thinking about taking the step towards carbon neutral because they can get the carbon neutral rating, the cost of that underwritten as part of this offer as well. So we'd love to hear from you about that, and I'll just quickly post the link to that offer in the chat as well.
Cool. So that takes us to the end of the webinar. Thank you so much all for attending. We really appreciate it, and we hope you found it somewhat informative and useful. Yeah, and I guess we hope you have a lovely Tuesday afternoon. Please reply to or respond to the survey. That would be great. Cool.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.